I'm gonna say it, tapirs are some of the weirdest animals in the world. I mean, they look like a cross between a horse and a pig, and that nose is something out of the Ice Age. But, do you know what's weirder? Their range. Because if we consult this handy dandy map on your screen right now, we see they're mostly concentrated in South and Central America, which for the most part makes sense, right? But then, what's this over here? Why? How? Like, did they swim the length of the Pacific? Or did they catch a ferry over there? Get a 2-for-1 deal with Jet2 Holidays? Well, join me today as we learn about the tapir and answer this one simple question. How in the name of all that is holy did they get over there? Hey there folks, my name's Jake, and in today's video we'll be looking at one of the most fascinating animals on earth and what makes them so weird. But before we begin, if you wouldn't mind hitting that like and subscribe button, it would really be appreciated. Think of it as your way of leaving me a tip. Anyway, let's get cracking. So, for the unaware in the audience, there are 4 recognized species of tapir. These are the Central American tapir, the South American tapir, and the mountain tapir. All of these are pretty similar. They all have long noses, their coats are variations of the colour grey and brown. Although the mountain tapir does have a thicker coat to help it cope with its environment. So these 3 are basically the 3 musketeers of the tapir family. They're all pretty uniform and they all make sense. And then we arrive at the black sheep of the family, which up till now I've been purposely ignoring. This is the Malayan tapir. This thing is totally different from its cousins. First and most obviously the colour. Instead of the browns and greys of the other species, it's instead replaced by a black and white colour scheme. This is called disruptive camouflage and is the same principle that zebras use. They are also the largest of all the tapir species and have the longest nose in them all. Despite this, they still retain their bizarre hoof layout and lead a very similar lifestyle to their cousins in South America, fulfilling the role of seed distributors and also creating new trails in their habitats using their large bodies to move through the vegetation. But if we just move back to their hooves, you may be wondering, why are their hooves so weird? Well, tapirs are classified as ungulates. Don't know what that is? Well, let me break it down for you, right? We've got 2 types. Those who walk on even digits, so this is your deer, your giraffes, your bison, and also your wild boar, and those who walk on odd digits. Within this, there are 3 species, that being horses and rhinos. Simple enough, right? So, which family does this foot belong to? Well, I'll help you with this. Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4. That means they're in with the even boys, right? Well, no, because this is a tapir, and actually they go with the odd lads, which, I will give it to them, at least their back feet got the memo, because they actually have an odd amount of digits. The reason for this is quite simple. It's essentially because the tapir's feet are well adapted to walking through muddy environments, with their toes acting very much like anchor points, which in places like South America and Southeast Asia, both of which are fairly well known for getting a bit wet. So this is very useful. We also need to acknowledge this. If you look at their calves specifically, they use which makes them harder to spot, being a mixture of the disruptive camouflage and the more normal camouflage, showing that there are very clear connections between these 4 subspecies despite the vast distances separating them. We also need to acknowledge their large noses, known as a proboscis. It's not got a trunk, for God's sake get that monkey off my screen. It's not quite a trunk, but it does provide the tapir control over its nose and increases its ability to smell its environment. In fact, when the tapir is walking around, it will usually have its nose to the ground sniffing for food. It's also able to be used to reach up and grab food in branches. They also have the added benefit of being able to use their noses as snorkels, which allows the tapir to keep itself in the water for a longer period of time. And with tapirs being natural born swimmers, they are able to spend long periods in the water, but this doesn't explain how they got to South America. Unless of course they swam the width of the Pacific, but somehow I think that's quite unlikely. So, to answer this question, we have to go back to when Earth looked like this. Now, what you can see is that the Earth's shape is very similar to what we would recognise today, with all the major continents being present and looking roughly the same. However, sea levels would have been lower during this period because of the massive glaciers in the northern hemisphere. What this meant that the modern day Strait of Malacca will have been connected to the main free islands of Indonesia. This region at the time was called Sundaland, and it helps us to understand how the Malayan tapir is able to simultaneously exist on both mainland Asia and also the island of Java. It's because during this period they were able to simply walk from one to the other, with the two populations becoming trapped and separated from each other as a result of the glaciers melting at the end of the last ice age. This also explains why Indonesia shares so much wildlife with mainland Asia, like tigers and elephants, while the island of Papua New Guinea and also Australia, who are quite close, don't. It's because these two islands were never connected to the mainland. As a result, we're able to develop more unique native species, because they lacked what we would consider to be more traditional species. And also, you see this because the two islands were once connected, and there is a decent amount of shared wildlife between them too. Examples of this would be the cassowaries, the wallabies, and also the dingoes or singing dogs. This would have continued for a period of time until the land bridge connecting these two land masses sank. But that's enough on that side tangent, and I still haven't answered the question. How did they get to South America, for God's sake, man? I can hear you shouting it. Lower your voice, no need to be that loud. Well, before we do that, let's look at the tapir before they made the journey. So, tapirs had prior to the ice ages been able to spread out as far afield as Europe, with fossils of European tapirs dating back as far as the Oligocene, some 23 million years ago. But that's not actually where they originate, because the tapir comes from North America. And I know that might be a bit surprising. As you can see from this map, there's no tapirs there today. And what it all boils down to really is climate. What you really need to remember is that the climate during this period would have been very much like our own. However, throughout this period, it would have shifted to far cooler temperatures, foreshadowing what would have happened in the Pliocene and the following ice ages. The result of this, however, was that these early tapirs, among other animals, were able to cross the Bering Land Bridge, which was a landmass that connected both Alaska and Siberia together. Once they crossed through the land bridge, they were able to migrate down into Southwest Asia and also eventually reaching parts of Europe. However, once the Pleistocene began and the Earth slowly began to cool, entering the ice ages, this would result in it becoming harder for tapirs, along with other animals, to cross the Bering Land Bridge, with the bridge being swallowed by the waves some 11,000 years ago. However, at the same time, the North American continent was slowly stretching out to reach South America, with the creation of the Isthmus of Panama, which is now the modern nation of Panama. What this resulted in was something called the Great American Interchange, where a large amount of fauna from both continents would cross into the other. The result of this would be tapirs making their way down the new continent, where they would eventually end up thriving. Now, you may wonder what happened to those living in North America. Well, it's the exact same thing that happened to those living in Europe. As the climate changed and it became cooler, it was far harder for the tapir to survive and adapt, and because it couldn't adapt quickly enough, these animals went extinct, with the last tapir species found in North America being the California tapir, and that went extinct some 13,000 years ago. And this is a very similar fate to a lot of North American megafauna, such as the giant ground sloth, as well as the native species of horse. And although it's hard to determine, it's likely that recently arrived humans would have helped to speed up this process, as we typically tend to do. To this day, tapirs are considered to be relics of a bygone era that require highly specific circumstances to survive, and they have found sanctuary in South America and are holding on for dear life in Southeast Asia. However, as a result of human encroachment, including agricultural developments as well as poaching, the Malayan tapir is thought to have less than 2,500 wild individuals left, and a similar story is occurring for the Central American and mountain tapirs, although their populations were likely small anyways, which actually is kind of worse because it makes them more vulnerable to changes in their habitat. As for the lowland tapir, while they are the most common and have the largest range and thus will have the largest population, parts of their population are slowly becoming more and more isolated, so their fate is far from certain, and the loss of this species would be a real shame, because there is nothing like them on our planet, with their closest living relatives being the horse and the rhino. And both of these are fascinating in themselves, don't get me wrong, but is in my opinion the perfect mixture of the two. Let's put that aside for a second. They connect us to a time when megafauna were commonplace, when you could walk from the old world to the new world relatively easily. And the loss of these bizarre animals would mean the loss of one of nature's living relics, and the severing of a link between us and a time in which animals are far more unique. And with that, that's the tapir, and their truly fascinating history. Again, small reminder to do the YouTube things, you know what they are, really goes a long way. And also check out this video on possibly the most aggressive small animal in the world. But before you go, you better remember, bring an umbrella, eat some berries, and I'll see you in the next one.